So here we are in the week of the season of Easter. That's right. I imagine that you all are aware of that, but Easter isn't a day, it's a season, and this is our 5th Sunday in Easter. I suppose it's not really all that much of a surprise that on each of the Sundays thus far, there has been at least one of our lessons read that talks about someone's experience of the risen Lord. They tell their story of how they have seen Him. If you remember Easter Sunday, it was Mary Magdalene who goes to the tomb, finds it empty, runs back, tells Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved. They come to the tomb, they confirm that it's empty, then they go home, and that's when Jesus came to her, touched her on the shoulder, called her by name, and she sees Him. And He tells her these wonderful things, and then she runs back to the disciples and says, "I have seen the Lord," and tells them all that He said to her. That was Easter Sunday. The second Sunday in Easter, we hear from the book of Acts and the earliest movements in the church. And this time the storyteller is Peter. He's standing with the other 11, and he's standing in front of the Israelites, and he's saying to them, "This Jesus was the Son of God, and we are all here to witness to you that He is risen." And he's telling all who have ears to hear, "Look, we've seen Him. He is risen." The third Sunday in Easter is that great gospel story where two are walking on the road to Emmaus. Were you here to hear that story? And a traveler sort of falls in stride with them, and they don't recognize him at first. And it's when they eventually sit down at the beach and share a meal that they realize, "Oh, this is Jesus right here." And then He sort of mysteriously disappears. And so excited, they go back to the other disciples in Jerusalem, and they say, "We have seen Him. We have seen the risen Lord." Today, here we are, this Sunday, and we have another storyteller yet again, by the way, bless you. And we have another storyteller yet again. It's Stephen. Stephen is standing before the crowd, and this time he's talking about his experience of the risen Jesus, and it's not a face-to-face experience he's talking about, but it is an experience that he had in a vision, where he's saying, "I had this vision, and Jesus was standing at the right side of God the Father." Now you gotta take a moment and sort of applaud Stephen for his courage here, because well, first of all, I mean, if you went and said, "Oh, I had a vision of Jesus," your friends would say, "I'm going to just call 911. I'll be right back." But he's talking about this vision. He's putting it out there. He's saying, "I had a vision of Jesus." And not actually in front of his friends. He's talking to a hostile crowd. This crowd that he's talking to, they would have been possibly the kind of people who would have yelled, "Crucify Him." They certainly would have been the kind of people who would have sort of scolded and made fun of Jesus' followers. And Stephen is saying in this vision, let me tell you something. You all got it wrong. He really was something special. And I'm here to tell you that you couldn't kill Him. I've seen Him. You didn't have the final say, because He is standing at the right side of God. Pretty gutsy, Stephen. So I was thinking about all these storytellers that we've heard from over the course of this Easter season. And something occurred to me. It dawned on me that while God didn't need us for Easter to happen, God did that all by the glory of God's grace. God very much, back then and still today, needs us to let people know that Easter is happening. Let me say that again. God needs us to let people know that Easter is happening. God needs us to be storytellers. few years ago, I went to a conference on the state of the church, and the keynoter asked a room filled with clergy. He said, "So, what do you think is the biggest crisis facing the church today?" Well, it was a room filled with clergy. We had plenty of opinions because clergy always do, right? But before I tell you what was said, let me ask you. So what would you say is the biggest crisis, the biggest problem, the biggest challenge facing the church today? What would you say? Don't worry, there's not a right or wrong answer, but I'm curious. What would you say to that question? Tell me. Finances. Finances. She knows. She puts in our finances. Finances. Okay? What else?
Empty pews.
Empty pews. What else?
Separation.
Separation. Separation.
Crisis of faith.
Crisis of faith. So you can guess.
Acceptance of all types of people, all races.
Acceptance of all ages, all races, all kinds of people. So you guys are good. You don't need clergy to tell you what the problems are. Those are some of the same things that were said at that conference, along with, I say this respectfully, but an aging church. Along with the challenges that we face from sort of our so-called secular world. Now we've got people who are complaining, we've got sports on Sundays and other things that are sort of tugging at people's demands. So the whole litany was listed at that conference. And the keynote sort of stood there very, very patiently and listened and nodded his head, and then he said, "I think you're all wrong." He said, "I'll tell you what the biggest problem facing the church is today. It is that the people of the church, both you clergy and the people sitting in the pews, the people of the church are either unable or unwilling to speak about their experiences of God. They're either unable or unwilling to talk about how they encounter the living God. People aren't telling stories about how the stories from Scripture connect with their own faith stories, with their own human stories. People aren't talking about how Easter is born time and time again in their own lives. What he was saying at that conference is that we're no longer telling the Easter stories. And he said, I'll tell you something. If we're not telling the stories, then the people who don't know them will never learn them. And if they don't learn them, then the church is going to die. He said, look, God won't die, because God's sneaky. God has a way of popping up here and there. But the church is going to die. We need to tell our stories. So I drove home, and I'm not sure whether I was just disheartened or challenged, or I drove home with a mixture of emotion. But I was thinking to myself, so what is it? Why is it that it's hard for us to tell our stories? Why is it that we don't tell our stories? And of course my first thought was, well, we're New Englanders, we just don't do that. My second thought was, well, that's kind of private, that faith stuff. And it is, but, you know, on the other hand, my word, since the advent of social media and Facebook and Instagram and reality TV, and I don't know what's private and what's public anymore. The boundaries are blurred, so really? Is it too private to talk about our religion? Talk about other things that I won't mention in mixed company all the time. So is it that? Or is it because we're afraid to tell our stories? I mean, it is a scary thing. Look what happened to Stephen, right? He told his story. They ambushed him, dragged him out of the city, and stoned him to death. That didn't go over so well. I don't think we have to worry about being stoned to death, but in all seriousness, you know, I know that if I'm at a party and someone says to me, so what do you do for a living? I'm like, go. Do I tell them? Because I wonder, am I going to be judged? They're going to make assumptions about me, or they're going to label me, or something like that. I mean, it can be scary to tell our stories, I think. All of that makes me sad, but then the thought that came to me concerned me the most. And that is, maybe part of why we don't tell our stories is because we don't think that we have any stories to tell. Could that be? Could it be that we don't think that we have any encounters with God and with the holy as we walk through our days? Could it be that we don't know how our stories have echoes of the faith stories? Could it be that we don't see Easter sort of unfolding in front of us or blooming within us? Could it be that we don't think we have any stories to tell? I don't know. But I know that when we look in the eyes of someone who loves us dearly, a partner or a child, or when we see the random acts of kindness from a stranger, I do believe that we're glimpsing God, you know? Or when we're having a moment where we're so anxious that we're almost paralyzed with fear, and then we hear a still small voice inside of us say, "Do not be afraid." Or when we're on the assembly line making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to go for our mobile loaves and fishes run, and we don't know whether we're going to have enough food, and we come back having had enough to feed a multitude. I think in those moments, if we just tilt our ear up to the skies, we can hear the whispers of our holy stories being told again and again. Or when we've had the experience of losing a job, and that despair, only to have a new door open for you, or the grief of a divorce, to have the invitation to new love. Aren't those examples of Easter moments? We have stories to tell. We do it. If only we can have the faith of Mary and the excitement of the travelers and the boldness of Peter and the courage of Stephen. We have stories to tell. God knows we have stories to tell. And God needs us to tell those stories. Albert Einstein once said, there are two ways to live your life. As if nothing is a miracle, or as if everything is a miracle. I think if we live our life the latter way, we will find we have stories to tell. So tell me, what's your story?